What's up, fam? Welcome back to another exciting edition of Keith Walker Books Reads. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel if you're not already subscribed. All right, today I'm going to read a poem by Dudley Randall. He lived from 1914 to the year 2000. He was born in Washington, D.C. before moving to Detroit. Now, it is said that he wrote his first poem when he was 4 years old. I totally believe it. I know he published his first poem when he was 13. I did another one of his poem, an analysis for it. It was the Ballad of Birmingham. It's on this channel. I highly suggest you check it out. It's an awesome poem. This poem that I'm going to read was published in 1969, and I'll offer an analysis of it after I'm done reading. Booker T and W.E.B. It seems to me, said Booker T, it shows a mighty lot of cheek to study chemistry and Greek when Mr. Charlie needs a hand to hold a cotton on his land. And when Miss Ann looks for a cook, why stick your nose inside a book? I don't agree, said W.E.B. If I should have the drive to seek knowledge of chemistry or Greek, I'll do it. Charles and Miss can look another place for hand or cook. Some men rejoice in skill of hand and some in cultivating land, but there are others who maintain the right to cultivate the brain. It seems to me, said Booker T, that all you folks have missed the boat who shout about the right to vote and spend vain days and sleepless nights in uproar over civil rights. Just keep your mouth shut. Do not grouse, but work and save and buy a house. I don't agree, said W.E.B. For what can property avail if dignity and justice fail? Unless you help to make the laws, they'll steal your house with trumped up claws. A rope's as tight, a fire's as hot, no matter how much cash you've got. Speak softly and try your little plan. But as for me, I'll be a man. It seems to me, said Booker T, I don't agree, said W.E.B. All right, so that's that poem. This is an awesome poem. It's actually got a lot of insight to it. But to understand the insights, you got to understand who the poem is written about. So this poem is basically fictionalized, or it could have been a true conversation. I doubt it. But it's a conversation between Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. So just by reading the poem, you get the sense of which path these men took when it came to civil rights back in the day. So Booker T, he lived from 1856 to 1915. He was an educator, author, orator, and advisor to several presidents, and he was pretty much the most dominant leader for the African American community from 1890 through 1915. But he kind of caught a little flack towards the end because a lot of his critics felt like he accommodated to white supremacy. And the main reason they felt this way is because of the Atlanta Compromise. So Booker T. Washington gave this speech where he brought up this compromise that blacks and whites could have in the South. And the Atlanta Compromise was an agreement between African American leaders and Southern white leaders in which the Southern blacks would work meekly and submit to the white political rule. And in return, the Southern blacks would get a basic education and due process of the law. So W.E.B. Du Bois, he was a sociologist, a socialist, historian, civil rights activist, and he mainly targeted racism and Jim Crow laws and discrimination in education and employment and things like that. So he did not like this plan about the Atlanta Compromise at all. He felt like Booker T. Washington was taking a slow route. He didn't think that black people, while waiting for their rights, they should actually fight for their rights. And he didn't like the idea of them just basically passively agreeing to submit to segregation and discrimination, which kind of is what the compromise would tell them to do. So these two in real life, they became at odds. But it's interesting to note and important to note that towards the end, W.E.B., he took back some of the bad things he said about Booker T. Washington. I mean, they disagreed, but he didn't want it to be the public spat that it turned out to be. And he kind of felt bad about the fact that it became such a publicized disagreement between the two. And I guess this could be similar. I mean, you could write a poem similar to this about, say, Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr. So we know Malcolm X, he thought that black people should fight back and get their rights now and by any means necessary. If the white man attacks us, we got to fight back. And that fiery rhetoric was pretty much the opposite of Martin Luther King Jr., who thought that nonviolent protest was the way to victory, the way to get everything changed. Because if you fight back, then you got a riot, then you got people getting killed in it. Martin Luther King Jr., he didn't think that route will be helpful. And as history shows, nonviolent protests seem to get more done in the long run. And a lot of the civil rights legislation would be directly resulted from Martin Luther King Jr.'s approach rather than Malcolm X. As far as the analysis to the poem, so you got Booker T. Washington initiating most of the conversation. He starts off by saying it shows a lot of cheek to study chemistry and Greek when Mr. Charlie needs a hand. So Mr. Charlie, that's basically just a imperious white man. And it could also be used to describe a presumptuous black man who kind of kowtows to white people. So he says when Mr. Charlie needs a hand to hold a cotton on his land and Miss Ann needs a cook, why stick your nose in a book? So Miss Ann would probably in most scenarios be the master's wife. Now that stanza, it says a lot, but it's not historically accurate. Because Booker T. Washington, he was one of the black elites. He was highly educated. And Booker T. Washington did want black people to get education. That's something he definitely wanted. And we got a lot of schools named after him because of that, because he was very outspoken when it came to black people educating themselves. In the second stanza, he says, W.E.B's responding to him, he says, some men rejoice in skill of hand and cultivating the land. So there are some people out there that, yes, they're okay with manual labor, but there are others who maintain the right to cultivate the brain. So once again, W.E.B. Du Bois, he's saying we don't need to be doing all this manual labor. We need to get an education. But like I said, Booker T. Washington wanted black people to get an education as well in real life. But in the third stanza, this kind of does fit into the Atlanta Compromise. So Booker T. Washington, he says, it seems to me that you've all missed the boat. You're shouting about the right to vote. Why are you in an uproar over civil rights? He said, keep your mouth shut and do not grouse, but work and save and buy a house. So he's saying that while you're out there protesting for the right to vote and all of this stuff, all these civil rights issues, you could just be going to work and saving your money and buying property, you know. But the problem with that is while working in an Atlanta Compromise, it would still put black people in a subjugated position. So yeah, you're working and yeah, you can get a house, but what have you done in the meantime? You didn't really gain anything as far as your civil rights, in which is why in the last stanza, W.E.B. says we could buy a house, but they could just make a trumped up laws. He said, for what can property avail if dignity and justice fail? So who cares if you have a house if you don't have dignity and if you don't have justice? And he also said, unless you help to make the laws, they'll steal your house on trumped up clause. So if the rights don't change, if everything doesn't change in the system, it doesn't matter if you have a house, because they could just come and take it because you don't even know who made the laws and whatever the laws are in that area, things like that. And then he mentions lynchings, which is very deep. He says, a rope's as tight, a fire as hot, no matter how much cash you've got. So he was definitely going at Booker T's throat with that one. He's like, we're still not, if we're going to be treated like this, if we're still going to be not get our rights, they could still lynch us. The rope, the fire, the whole scenario, no matter how much work you do and how much you think you built yourself up, if you still being subjugated in whatever area you live in, you haven't accomplished anything. So as far as whose side I would take in this scenario, I mean, reading the poem, I mean, obviously Booker T's put at a disadvantage because he sounds like he's willing to kowtow to Southern whites. And yeah, so just based on this poem, obviously someone like me would have to take W.E.B's side. But in real life, we got to understand Booker T did a lot. He did a tremendous amount of work for the black community, and he did accomplish a lot. This poem, in my opinion, does not give Booker T justice for all he did. Anyway, that's my take on it. Hope you like this video. If so, hit the like button and post a comment. Let me know what you thought of the analysis. And if you just stumbled across this channel and you're not subscribed, this would be a great time to hit the subscribe button. I'd love to see you around again. I appreciate your support. I'll see you next time.